7 years is long enough for thieves to forget who the land actually belongs to, and short enough for me to come back and make them remember. When my truck rolled past the old Blaine Ranch sign, I didn't expect a dog park, a vinyl banner, and a brand new steel gate staring me in the face. I expected my grandfather's porch, a crooked mailbox, the smell of coffee and hay. Instead, somebody had tried to turn my family's history into a weekend hobby for well-meaning neighbors, and they picked the wrong man to steal from. I hadn't been home in 7 years. Military deployments, odd jobs surveying public lands, a life threaded through government maps and boundary disputes. But the moment the gravel crunch changed under my tires, something in my gut tightened like a rope getting yanked. The high Wyoming sky looked the same, dry and endless, but the land had been rearranged while I was gone. Steel gates, cameras on poles, a neat little prefab security booth, and a vinyl sign that read, in chipper font, "Welcome Private Training Grounds." Private, apparently, unless your name happened to be Blaine. I parked boots, scuffing the gravel, and stared at the chain link in place of cedar posts, where the porch used to be, where my grandfather used to sit with a cigar and a laugh that could drown out a storm. There were plastic tunnels and rubber ramps. A man in a security shack barely looked up when I walked over. "You the owner here?" I asked, voice flat. He snorted, then reached for his radio. "You HOA?" he asked. "No," I said. "Then you're trespassing, bud." So I told him. I told him my name. I told him the trust details. I told him the year my grandfather put a stake in this ground. That got his attention. He straightened like he'd been slapped awake. They'd filed something, he said, a lot of words that sounded official. I laughed a short, ugly sound and walked back to my truck to pull up the public records. My name was still there, plain as print. Blaine Family Trust, 160 acres, sole beneficiary. No liens, no transfers, no HOA declarations on record. But then I found a submission from a few years back, a boundary review, a colorful PDF that shaded my whole ranch as common use pending claim. They'd tried to redraw the map. I called the county recorder. Bev picked up on the second ring, a voice like a cigarette in kindness, someone who'd been working the same desk longer than most things last. She pulled the parcel and read aloud everything I already knew. "They filed a boundary expansion," she said. "There's a signature line here, but the pushback stalled it. Give me a day and I'll pull the original filing." I told her I didn't sign anything. She said she didn't think so. "If there's forgery, we'll catch it," she promised. I didn't hang up feeling reassured. I hung up with plans. There's a particular kind of quiet that sits over a place you grew up. It hums with memory. That morning, between coffee and cursing, I dug through old surveys, parcel overlays, and maps until my eyes watered. Whoever drew that HOA map had simply erased the trust lines and pasted a new lot number over them, like they thought property rights were stickers you could peel off and move around. The signature on the lease looked like someone tracing letters in the dark. So I came back with a grinder, 2 hired hands, and the kind of stubborn that runs in my family. We cut the new latch set temporary locks on the original post my grandfather hammered in and started undoing what they'd done. Removing fake turf, hauling away dog ramps, finding a corner pin buried under their chain link that proved in hard metal the fence line was 27 feet into my land. I took coordinates, stamped photos, and felt something settle into place. This was theft with spreadsheets, theft with invoices, theft with people who assumed no one would notice. And then she arrived, an arrival made for a parking lot drama, a black SUV, a blazer that looked pressed by committee sunglasses that declared authority. She walked up like she was the answer to an invitation I never got. "You need to stop," she snapped. "This is HOA property." I showed her the deed. I showed her the department overlay. She didn't look. She called enforcement. I smiled and told her calmly she could do whatever her little enforcement did once the sheriff showed up and compared her map to the deed. The sheriff did show Deputy Ray Calder, who knows everyone and remembers where he left his patients. He flipped through my paperwork, then held up one of her glossy maps. "These were filed as a request, ma'am," he said. "Not legal boundary changes. I'm not issuing fines." Her jaw tightened like a trap, and she stormed off, burning rubber and dignity. I watched the dust settle and felt the first small victory. Paperwork can lie, but metal posts don't. But it didn't stop at maps. 2 days later, a silver Tahoe rolled up with a realtor and his assistant in tow. They came with tablets and smiles and pre-listing optimism. Parcel 53, the realtor said, as if numbers own things. Pre-listing walkthrough. I handed him a packet of deeds and stamps and a GPS overlay showing his Parcel 53 was actually my grandfather's barn. He flipped through a document so clean it shimmered a lease supposedly signed by me 7 years earlier, authorizing development. My stomach sank. I wasn't even in the state that year. My signature a sloppy imitation, dated and notarized with a laughably wrong stamp. They'd made the paperwork, then they'd made the calls. When I followed the wires from the new keypad lock on my gate, they led to a local contractor's invoice, Prairie Fence, some regional crew that had installed hardware under an order signed by K. Fitzroy. I called the sheriff. He came bearing paperwork forms and an expression that said this was bigger than a neighborly dispute. The deputy ran the records and found a supplemental application filed the day before trying to reclassify my parcel as abandoned communal zone. It was no accident. It was a plan. Then it crossed a line that doesn't come back. The old Blaine, well, my grandfather dug it with hands that knew what hard work looked like, was tipped with concrete. Not the gentle patch of a farmer's fix, but industrial quickset poured right into the shaft. Dried cement crusted in a circle the size of a life. The crew that logged the job. A regional concrete company. The timestamp matched. The truck caught on my birdhouse camera. Behind the mixer, a Lexus idled. The woman in pearls, Karen, stood by the mixer like she was directing a stage play. She'd poured concrete into my well to destroy the pump, contaminate the system, and then filed an environmental complaint saying I'd created the mess. That was the moment fury flipped into something colder focus. I sent the footage to the Department of Environmental Quality. I handed GPS logs and invoices to the sheriff. I sat on a motel bed with a laptop and built a paper trail that would look like a highway to hell for whoever was driving this stunt. They thought they were clever. They used a shell entity, funneled bogus leases through third parties, notarized cheap copies, and stamped them into credibility. They had developers on the line, earnest money down, prepped to build eco-villas on my grandfather's pasture. They'd even edited drone footage and made fake bylaws. It was fraud, dressed in PowerPoint, and they dressed it for investors. We pushed back hard. My attorney filed an emergency injunction. The sheriff brought fraud investigators and the county recorder called in a forensic document analyst. The notary who supposedly witnessed my signature said she'd never seen the document. Contractors we subpoenaed said they'd been given orders from people who claimed authority they didn't have. The HOA's bank accounts frozen, their website archived, emails and internal notes poured out like a confession by proxy. And yet the uglier part of this story was the muscle behind the falsity, someone willing to try to bury truth with concrete and call it community. They staged the damage to make my land look like a dump, then filed fines and notices to force me out. They sent anonymous threats, a shipping container break-in attempt, a rattlesnake in an envelope, petty violence that read like a catalog of intimidation. But the law and the cameras and the GPS stamps and the witnesses all leaned the other way. The court hearing felt like a slow burn, stacks of affidavits, time-stamped footage overlays that made the crime scene undeniable. The judge watched the stream of evidence like he'd seen cruelty dressed as bureaucracy before and didn't have much patience for it. The developer lawyers screamed about being duped. Their fury did not excuse their negligence, but it did help. The notary testified, the contractor's app logs matched the camera footage, my grandfather's corner pins sat in evidence like a relic that refused to move. The judge found the HOA's claim unlawful, the forged documents criminal, and the sabotage a felony. She was convicted. The sentence felt huge and also small. Justice meted out in years that couldn't bring back the afternoons under my grandfather's porch or the smell of that first hay season. Her organization was dissolved, assets seized to fund cleanup, and the land's title cleared official and public. They evicted her collaborators. The dog training signs came down. I sat that last afternoon with the sun low, watching the wind sweep the pasture like it was erasing a bad dream. What I learned, and this is the part I say quietly because it's not heroic or tidy, is that vigilance is a muscle. Paperwork can be forged, maps can be redrawn, and a smile can hide a ledger. But records, timestamps, witnesses, and plain stubbornness matter. People will try to gamify land law and trust if they think no one's watching. You can fight anger with lawyers and cameras, but the real armor is the habit of checking things, keeping copies, and not letting nostalgia silence the alarm bells. So yeah, I rebuilt a fence, relit the well, signed a dozen affidavits, and drank bad motel coffee until the last invoice was filed. I sketched plans for a new house that honors the old one, a stone cabin with a solar roof, 2 horses, a porch, where my grandfather's cigar smoke can still find me. I'm not saying the world is fair or that karma is a reliable accountant, but sometimes the ledger balances and sometimes the people who tried to steal your life end up packing their bags under the courthouse lights. Here's something to sit with when power is diffused and paperwork is trusted more than people. What stops someone from drawing new lines on a map and calling it progress? Was justice enough in this case, or would a quieter, slower restoration have felt better? Tell me what you'd do if your land or your story was up for sale in someone else's spreadsheet. Have you ever had to prove something that should have been obvious? Share it. And if you've got advice for someone in a fight like mine, don't hold back.